Hey everybody, and welcome to another non-blocking networking tutorial. In this tutorial, what we are going to do is make our client, and in the previous tutorial I had described this as a client simulator, and the reason I had said that is because we will be able to simulate multiple clients with this one client. So if we want to, for example, have 500 clients connect to our server, that will be possible, or however many, just by changing a variable. The first thing we're going to do is just have our basic WinSock API startup stuff that we would have with a blocking client. And then we're going to set up our sock adder info. In this case, I'm connecting to the local host, so I'm connecting to the same computer. And I'm connecting on port 8888. The next thing we're going to do is there's a lot of ways you could do this, but I'm going to have two vectors of sockets. One is going to be pending connections, and one is going to be active connections. So the way it's going to work is, let's say I want to simulate 10 clients. I will first populate the pending connections with those 10 sockets, and then while there are still more connections pending, I will try to connect them. If they successfully connect, I will remove them from the pending connections vector and then add them to the active connections vector. We're going to add another variable, which I guess this will be const. This will be the initial amount of connections that we're creating. The first thing we want to do is we want to populate our pending connections vector. So we're going to iterate through our connection count, and we'll do pending connections dot pushback, and I'm just passing in the constructor for initializing a socket. What we're going to do is we're going to check if this fails. We're just not really going to do this. So if pending connections at that index socket error, socket initialization failed, then we'll go ahead and call WSA cleanup and put socket failed to be initialized closing clients. Then we'll do a system pause and return. Okay, and after we initialize the socket, we have to put it in non-blocking mode. To put this in non-blocking mode, it's going to be the same as how we did it on the server. We're just going to set a ulong with the mode to any value that is not equal to 0. And then we're going to call IOCTL socket on the actual socket, the second argument being fin bio, and last argument being a reference to the mode. Next, what we have to do is we have to go through and actually connect all of our pending connections and then remove them from the pending connections vector and put them in the active connections vector. So we're going to say while there are still more pending connections, then we're going to go through and try to connect them. Now, the first thing we want to do before we actually try to connect is we want to make our 3 FD sets. We're going to have read, write, and accept. And as far as connecting goes, we're not going to be using read. but we will be using write and accept. Once we're actually in the main loop for all the clients, we'll be using all three. So in our for loop, the first thing we want to try to do is connect. So we will do pending connections I equals, and we are calling connect. Let's see. And then passing in the sock adder and the size of it. Now we want to add this socket to our FD set. And first we'll add it to the right FD set and the exceptions FD set. Okay, so next we want to select on our FD set. So we will wait until there's some type of activity. If a socket is in the right FD set, then that means that the connection was successful, as long as it's not in the accept FD set. Just because the socket is not in the accept FD set does not necessarily mean that we're connected. We need to make sure that we are in the right FD set also. So we're going to iterate through again. And the first thing we're going to check is if our socket is in the accept FD set. And if it is in the accept FD set, we want to try to get the error that occurred just so we can print it out. I guess this is the WinSock error defaulted to 0. Size int, because we're going to have to call getSockOpt on this. And for getSockOpt, the first argument is the socket. The level is socket level socket. I don't know if that's what SOL stands for, I'm guessing though. The operator name, socket error. The operator value is going to be a pointer to where we want to store the error. And the last value is an integer pointer to the size of where we are storing the error. And remember, if it returns 0, then that means it was successful. And then we're going to print out the socket number failed to connect with error, and then we will print out the error. The error that we will most likely get for these is just 10,061, which is where basically the connection just gets refused because, maybe it's processing other people connecting, since we're going to be simulating multiple clients. After we print that out, we're going to continue and just go to the next iteration in the loop. Else, if something happens and getSockOpt fails, we will print out, let's see, it failed to connect, and we will put and getSockOpt failed. And then we will also continue out of this. So if we get to this point and we haven't continued, after the if statement, if we get to this point, then we know that an exception did not occur. However, we still need to verify that we are actually connected. So we're going to be doing this by seeing if the pending connection is in the right FD set. And if the connection is in the right FD set, then yeah, it was connected. So what we can do is we can remove it from our pending connections vector. And we can add it, before we remove it, we want to add it to the active connections vector. Now, something else about this you may have noticed is where I am, this isn't really a big optimization or anything for this, but where I am iterating from 0 to the total size and I am erasing, if I remove, for example, let's say I have 10,000 elements in my vector and I remove the first element, the other 9,999 elements will have to move their place over to the left. Whereas if I iterate from the back to the front, this won't be an issue. Well, elements still are going to get moved, but it'll be a lot less elements. So it'll be a minor optimization. Something else is if I iterate from the front to the back, I'll have to add in I minus equals 1, just so that way we don't skip over connections. So to fix this, we're just going to iterate from the back to the front. So we're going to start at size minus 1, and we are going to continue as long as I is greater than or equal to 0. And we're going to decrement the iterator instead of increment it. Something I completely forgot to do. Let's go ahead and... I mean, we could print out connected here, but if we have 9,000 connections, there's no reason to print out connected 9,000 times. Right here in our while loop, before we are adding any of our connections to our FD sets, we need to zero our FD sets. And I'm not going to zero the read FD set because we're not using it yet. There's no reason to. Next, we will make our main loop for our clients. The first thing we want to do is zero out all of our FD sets. And then we want to select, we want to go through our active connections and add them to the FD sets. Next, we want to select, and we're just going to pass in our read FD set, write FD set, and accept FD set, and we're not going to time out. Which you could put a timeout if you want. I don't really know why you would for this example, but maybe there's a reason you would want to. After that, we are just going to go through each connection. And see if something happened on any of the 3 FD sets. And once again, we may be removing from this vector in this loop. FD is set. There we go. we may be removing from this vector in this loop. So instead of iterating from the front to the back, I'm going to change this and iterate from the back to the front. And I don't think I had done this on the server originally when I had made those first two tutorials, but I mean, that's like a one condition change. It's not a big deal. We could probably do that in the next tutorial if I haven't done it. So what we're going to do is, if there was an exception on any of the connections, let's scroll up and find, where to have that get sock opt. Here we go. Just going to copy and paste this and change it a little bit. Alright, so we're going to have our WinSock error default to 0. We're going to try to get what the error was and put disconnected with error, or we'll put disconnected and get sock opt failed. And after we get here, we want to actually remove it from the vector. And remember, since we are iterating from the back to the front, we don't have to worry about doing I minus minus or anything. Next, we want to see if there is data to be read. And then we want to see if the socket is writable. So if we can send data on the socket and it won't block, or shouldn't block. Okay, and after we get out of our loop, we're going to call WSA cleanup. And just for my example, I'm going to change it so if I have, I'm going to add a timeout, and the reason I'm going to do that, let's see, what was that? Time val, timeout. I'll make it, I don't really know how long these are, say 500 microseconds. That's probably way too short. Let's see. Okay, so 1 second is 1 million microseconds. So let's say I just want to only time out for a half second, so I would do 500,000 microseconds. So I'm going to do that. For my select, instead of passing in null, I will pass in a reference to timeout. And the reason that I'm doing this is because I want to stop on this for a minimum, a maximum of a half a second and monitor the FD sets. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to add something in for this testing where I can disconnect all the clients when I want to. So I'm going to say get async key state. This is just used to see if I'm holding down a key. If F1 is pressed, then I just realized something else I forgot too. When we are disconnecting the clients, before we erase them, we need to close the socket. Okay. So if F1 is pressed, we need to go through our existing connections. And we're just going to close the socket on them I guess we'll iterate from the back to the front. Just follow what we've been doing and clear it out. And I'm actually going to move this to the end of our loop. After we have closed all of our connections and erased them from the vector, we are going to break out of that while loop, which we don't really need this break since our while condition is as long as the size is greater than 0. After that, we'll call WinSock API cleanup. In the server, I'm going to go ahead and add something similar. I'm going to copy that timeout. And in the server, instead of being F1, I'm going to use F2. And I'll just put it at the end of the while loop. Okay, so let's test out and see if it did everything right or if we messed something up here. So all our current server is doing before we run this is if we get data from the client, we are, printing it out. We're expecting 4 bytes of data. You see right here we're receiving 4 bytes and we're just printing out that 4 bytes. And if there's data to be written, or not if there's data to be written, but if the socket is ready to be written to, we are not sending data, but we're checking for it. And then obviously we are checking in case any exceptional conditions occur. So our server is running. Let's run our client. Oh, it looks like something went wrong here. So let's see what that's all about. Okay, the problem is I had accidentally called connect wrong. So we're not going to be using the return value since we're using non-blocking sockets of connect because it won't really tell us whether the connection was successful or not. But I shouldn't have been setting the socket equal to connect. I should have just been calling connect. And we're not using the return value. So let's try this again. Run the client. And let's run the server. And see what happens now. So we have our new connection on the server. And in our client, we are in our main loop at this point. I can hold down F1 and my program blows up. We'll see what happened there. Let's go back to the server real quick. I meant to change the server to close with F2. So back in our client, blew up when I had hit F1. And the reason is because I started my for loop for when we disconnect everything at active connection size. I should have started at size -1. So for example, if we only have one connection, our size will be 1. So I want to access the element at index 0. So 1 minus 1 is 0. I don't want to access the element at index 1 because there is no element if the total size is only 1. Let's try this one more time. Sorry about all the issues. I didn't really test run through this before I started the video. Okay, so we have a new connection, and I can hit F1, and we lost a connection. Then I can hit F2, or I can hold F2. And nothing happens. Let's see, did I not pass in my time val to select? No, I did not. So I need to pass in timeout to that select. And now when I run my server, I can hold F2. And it blows up. I did the exact same thing with the for loop down here, I guess. Yep. I should have started at size -1, and I started at size. There we go. So before we end this tutorial, let's just have the client send some example data. Let's test this one more time. All right, lost connection, F2. Okay. So we know that our server will print out a 4-byte buffer with the, that's expecting a null terminator. So we're going to have a null terminator on our client when we send it. We're going to create our buffer ABC. And keep in mind, this is really ABC null terminator. You just can't see the null terminator, but it's there. And down here, if we are ready to write, we are going to call send. We're going to pass in the socket. We're going to pass in the buffer. We are sending 4 bytes and no flags. So if we run the client, we'll get, this socket failed to connect with error 10,061 because the server's not running, it's refusing connections. We run the server, and we get a connection, and we're getting a strange result, and I think I know why that is. I believe I had changed it so that the server was actually printing out an integer instead of, let's see, print out buffer. Yeah, I was testing something out. Let's run that again, just ignore what just happened. Okay, and you see we're sending ABC a whole bunch. Oh, meant to use F1. Just so WSA cleanup got called, but it's okay. So that is all that we are going to cover for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we are probably going to cover the issue of, if you remember with our blocking sockets, just because we call send and we're sending 4 bytes doesn't mean that 4 bytes will be sent. And just the same deal on the server. Just because we are calling receive right here, it doesn't necessarily mean that 4 bytes will be received. So in the next tutorial, we're going to cover how to handle that. And depending on how long that takes, we might go into handling messages of different sizes. So that's all that we are going to cover for this tutorial. And once again, thanks for watching.